Hello everyone, thought I'd do something a little less informative, a little more on the entertainment side today, and you can see on your screen that I'm working on a tier list here. I've decided why not just rank every point on pretty much every competitive map. There are a couple maps absent here. Manbase and Logjam are absent, but I haven't played those maps a ton, so I don't have strong opinions on them. But anyway, let us just hop right into things. So, if you don't recognize these points, don't worry. I will talk about them and rank them. And starting off with a real stinker, we have Badlands last. Badlands is a map that everyone wants to play again. Well, not everyone. A bunch of people want to play again, but it's so bad. There's definitely interesting elements, and in some respects it was ahead of its time, considering that this was literally a TF2 launch map that was available when the game was first released, back when you paid for it and everything. And there's some interesting stuff going on. Of course, Spire is a favorite MGE arena, and Badlands Mid as well is a popular MGE arena. So it's definitely map geometry people like taking fights on and engaging with. The Badlands flank, well, let's talk about that later, I guess, when we get to the other points on Badlands. But the last has always stood out as one of the worst points and one of the major downsides of this map as a whole. It is so insanely claustrophobic and so insanely difficult to peek any door because you have to play against a demo and two soldiers. I mean, you either go towards the upper area and bats, top left or top right, which are both insanely spammable and insanely easy to spam out. You can peek main, which is just low ground, or you can go bottom right, which is also one of the smallest, lowest ground doors of all time, and you're just playing against a roamer there who's just going to completely shut you out. So it's insanely impossible to really pressure into or do anything into. And the way that this was balanced out, similar in the case of Dust Bowl, where it's just such a ridiculously defense-favored map, and instead of making any map elements that favor the attackers or give them options to potentially win with, they instead just crank up the round timer as just a band-aid fix. Okay, here you go. Now you can just be stuck in purgatory for longer. In the similar kind of design case with Badlands, the balancing factor, quote-unquote, is just the point caps insanely fast. So you just have a rise of really gimmicky strategies of obviously a quickie bomb, clear traps on the point, and insta-cap type of stuff arises, as well as just pressuring cap. It just leads to really gimmicky play, I just lost the word. It just leads to gimmicks, basically, and is one of the worst points in the entire game. And as a result, it's going to go in the D tier. Next, we have Badlands 2. Badlands 2 is decent. It's quite large, and there are some really annoying sniper sight lines, like on bats, for instance. But the mid to second stalemate is pretty decent. Now, of course, you have choke itself, which teams could potentially... Well, it's difficult to take space choke if a demo's holding it close, of course, because it's quite a small choke point. And you can maybe pressure from house as well onto Haunter. But it's going to be difficult to do because the doors are just very, very narrow. But the Badlands second flank is considered one of the best flanks on any map, honestly. Because it's very open. It's it has a lot of interesting gameplay. And also it has the really strange quirk of the forward spawn is always accessible, which is really weird. And this leads to some interesting plays where, a team trying to back up or something, or a player caught or something, has access to that resupply room and can back spawn and not be caught or anything to that effect, which is pretty interesting. That being said, I don't know if I like Badlands 2 that much. I'm just not huge on Badlands in general, but I think I'll give this... Ooh, what do I give it? Keep in mind as well, the sniper sightline is horrendous. You can't really do anything against the sniper bats. There are some drop-down wrap potential. Choke is kind of impossible to do anything through. I'll give it a C tier. Flank, wonderful. You can have a lot of fun on the flank, but combo stuff is really not that great. Okay, Badlands mid. Badlands mid is quite interesting. So the actual area itself of the high ground, just the main bridge, is pretty limited, I think. And when I say I think, I just mostly mean like in my opinion. So it is pretty premier high ground, right? There are plenty of options for like flanking plays because of course you can go through, you can go under the point, you can go through the shed on the side, whose call out I'm not going to say right now, but there's potential to wrap teams, and overall I think it's a pretty interesting mid fight. It's more of a tug of war kind of mid fight. There aren't really rotation options available, but there's room for players to maneuver around and go through. There just is not a lot of real estate to play around. So it's going to be very spam dominant, and yeah. But overall, not a terrible mid. I think there are definitely much worse mids. I think I might put this as a B tier, actually. I think it's solid. Okay, we have Granary last. Granary last is such a weird point. Now, to be fair, Badlands and Granary, I just don't have as much experience on. I've obviously played these maps, but especially in the case of Badlands, it's been such a long time. But anyway, Granary last is massive, but all the doors are still like front-loaded and kind of close together. So pressuring is not really that easy anyway. Plus, they're shutter doors, so again, it's much easier to hold them. You have like the upper lobby area from which you can pressure, but again, pretty claustrophobic, very easy to spam out. I will say guns are a little less powerful in the sense that the last is just so large that a gun can't kind of watch everything like it could on a Snakewater last, for instance, or really any of the modern lasts that we play. So it has that going for it. And yeah, in a dishad situation, guns as well are just not that great. It's just so much space. You can have some interesting fights here. It's just very wide open, which is a unique quirk of it. I think in a last push situation, it's a pretty solid last, but in an even Uber situation, it's not great at all. There aren't interesting pressures. The doors are just generally inaccessible. It's more so just relying on something not being watched. But that being said, the defenders are spread a little thin because it's difficult to get heals to both sides expeditiously. But I guess with arrows and whatnot, a soldier can reliably hold a shutter. But yeah, I think because the even Uber stalemate is going to be not great, we're going to put this in the C tier. Okay, we have Granary second. Granary second is curious, because there is actually a very solid flank here that is very pressurable. It's not too bad to shove an entire team through it and potentially pressure it that way and threaten to like wrap the point. So that's interesting. It is very claustrophobic and everything is trappable. And outside of like pressuring garage side of things and going like lunchbox and that area of the map, it's quite difficult to get through because of course the biggest door is a shutter, which is extremely easy to trap and actually has like interesting geometry where the actual shutter door curves up and that entire apparatus is trappable. And then there's Z, which is just impossible to really do much into. So yeah, very tough nut to crack. You know, I remember watching maybe even only like a year ago or something, a lot of matches on this, just teams would default run banner. I think this point is kind of, is this a D? It's either a C or a D for me. I don't think it's that great. Yeah, I'm going to give it a D. And I'm sure some people that really like Granary are going to disagree with. And yeah, there are plenty of people, again, who love Granary and love Badlands, but not for me. So next we have Granary Yard. Granary gets lovingly called a 7 CP map because you have to not only push from mid into yard, but then yard into second. They kind of both function like their own points. Because of course there's no capture point in yard, but the way the doors are all set up, it's definitely resembling one. Yard I think is pretty decent. So you have a choke that's decently holdable, but you know, a soldier in garage can properly spam out a demo trying to hold choke, and there's plenty of room to work around and maneuver around with. And garage offers an entire flank into the other side of the point that you know, the combo is not going to be holding. So there's some interesting stuff there. You can flank shove, get people behind. Yeah, I think that yard might actually be a B tier point, even though it's not even technically a point. Okay, Granary mid. Granary mid is interesting. Very bomb oriented. It's insanely easy to high bomb, and the high ground is quite unique in that only scouts and soldiers can really access it at a moment's notice, and maybe only winger scouts. I don't know if a non-winger scout can jump up to the crates, but a demo, of course, can roll out bats and jump on top of the crates early into a mid, which will happen, and that high control or height positioning is nice. But if they get knocked off or spammed off, they just can't get back up unless they jump, which you're not going to want to be doing on a mid fight as a demo. It's very easy to die very early on as a demo. There's just kind of one health pack available, and if the other demo shows up sooner than you, then he can just beat you to it, and there's not much you can do. Vision is usually very obscured because, again, teams are generally playing on the floor, and these crates take up a lot of space, so it can be hard to see. And again, those high bombs are very strong. Not a mid that I have a ton of experience on, of course. There are some interesting mid-fight ideas, but a lot of it is just who can bomb better. Yeah, it's a weird mid. I'm going to tentatively put it in C tier for now, but that maybe if I played more Granary, I'd start to like the mid more. But for now, I don't know. Okay, that's it for Granary, and we are on to Gullywash last. Gullywash last used to be kind of hated. People thought it was really impossible to do anything into. You just had to snipe or do whatever. All the doors are so easy to hold. But as the meta developed, this is one of the least comfortable points to hold, in my opinion. At least, like, everything needs to be firing on all cylinders. Everyone needs to be on top of things, because pressure cooks are so good on Gully last that obviously, like, at an invite level or something, you pressure cook on most maps if you can. But Gullywash, the pressure cook is so intuitive and generally easy to pull off that even like main teams will pressure cook rather than just like rip double sacks over and over. So what do I mean by this? Well, there's basically 3 main doors you can peek. You have river, you have shutter, and you have launchpad. There is main, which technically is a door into last, but it's low ground and doesn't really have a good spam angle. Maybe if there's a sentry gun that's exposed to it or something. It is a sniper sightline if you're running a sniper, but by and large, launchpad, shutter, and river are the main doors that teams and players would like to spam through. But with a demo, a soldier, and another soldier, all 3 of those are held. However, if you get a player behind water, such as your flank scout, then that player is threatening to, you know, the opposite of submerge, reemerge. I don't know. They're threatening to reemerge from water and cap the point. So what teams will do in response is put a soldier on the ring above point so that that's no longer an option. But that's one fewer soldier holding a door, meaning that at any given point, one door is not being watched by a spam class, meaning if your demo, your soldier, and your other soldier all spam simultaneously, then some of that spam is guaranteed to be getting through. And a lot of the time, even the doors that are being held, some of the spam is coming through. So it's really solid to pressure into Gullywash last, and really puts the defenders on their toes. You have to be really solid with that defensive spam in order to hold on, because it can be very, very easy to lose a gun, get some spam on your medic, and then suddenly that roamer that was river is now bombing in and forcing you. Now, Gullywash does give rise to some gimmick strategies, such as like a pyro, Uber going water behind the point. As far as like a disad situation, there's like, I don't know. I generally am a big fan of Gullywash. It does have the quirk when you're pushing it that you don't really think about crossing with your Uber at all. You just always want to end top right because that's just the best positioning. Yeah, I think Gullywash might be an A tier point for me. I think there's a lot going on. It is an old map and an old point, but there's a lot of interesting elements that I am a fan of. Okay, on to Gully 2. Gullywash second. I am not a fan of, I don't think. So what is wrong with it, or what do I not like about it? The pressuring options are very limited. You can basically try and bully your way through choke, which you accomplish by, you can bomb a soldier through, or have one soldier tank the damage while the other one who's full buffed then bombs through. You can maybe spam and pressure from behind that bomb, but a lot of the time if the door is properly being held, that doesn't work. That's one option. And you can pressure big door and threaten to get a scout or a player behind baby door, from which they can recommit or just distract and then bomb choke or repressure big door. So you have options for sure, but that's kind of limited to, are we going choke or are we going big door? And especially if baby door is trapped, that just becomes much less accessible. Plus, defending it is also not that interesting, I think. If you're a soldier playing choke, I'm sure there's some interesting dynamics, but if you're just a demo holding big door, it's kind of boring. And playing against a sniper while holding 2 that's pressuring big door is maybe my least favorite hold in the entire game. As far as disad goes as well, there's some interesting disad traps you can get up as a demo, but there just is one of the easiest points to dry push. It's very difficult to accomplish much on disad. You really just go for the high bomb and hope most of the time, or you could be sniping forwards or whatnot. Yeah. Although I do enjoy dry pushing it because it's so easy. I think overall, I don't like this point. The even Ubers is not good. Defending at even Ubers is not good. Disad is not interesting. Is it a C or a D? I might actually put this as a D, which is weird because I like Gullywash. Okay, Gully mid. Gully mid is pretty decent. I think it's very bomb oriented, and you benefit a lot from bombing earlier than the other team. As a demo, you can get a lot of damage against another team walking up big door. And if you're using the lock as well, you can just instantly kill medics before they can even walk up to their side, which is funny. There are some options for strategy. You either play your side or their side, and then of course the pacing is all up to you. There are drop-down shenanigans you can do. There's a very powerful soldier fast rollout that doesn't really see much use. I feel like it should be more common. Like, demos need to be kept more in check on Gully, I think. But yeah, overall, I think the mid is generally interesting. I think similar to Badlands, it is more tug-of-war style, where, you just have this band of the point that is your only high ground to cross. But I'm generally a fan of Gully mid. It can be difficult. Like, there are some teams where they're just bad at Gully mid, and it's a hard problem to diagnose. But overall, I enjoy it. I'll give this a B tier. Okay, next we have Metalworks Last. So, Metalworks Last is considered one of the hardest points to do anything into. In an even Uber stalemate, from the attacker's perspective, trying to pressure left is nigh impossible if a soldier is holding it. So a lot of the time, any value you get through that door is strictly off of a proper timing and knowing the soldier's not there. That's really the only time you can get value there. Main and shutter are basically the same door. The shutter is insanely easy to peek, but you don't really get a ton of value peeking it necessarily. And of course they can just have the defensive sniper, which completely shuts down the shutter peek, and you can't do that anymore. So that's already 3 of the 4 doors out of the way if they have a gun and a sniper. And then your only option is right side, which very holdable for a soldier. A soldier can get spammed off of it, and you can potentially peek and potentially spam down a gun, but that's about it. And if their demo rotates properly, then yeah, good luck. So pressuring into this point is just notoriously difficult. Getting proper sacks off is notoriously difficult. So it's you very commonly see sniper into this point and banners into this point as well. As far as defending it goes, again, not very interesting. As a demo, you're just on the floor trying to avoid a sniper sight line. As a med, you're just hugging the wall, trusting that your gun knocks everything away. So again, sap and sacks as well are solid onto this last because the medic holds so close and is very dependent on that gun. As a demo, you can't even lock out the shutter because it's one of the easiest shutters to peek in the entire game. So yeah, you are basically just nonstop using ammo for nothing, just to prevent players from walking through or just for the formality of having stickies on the shutter. Yeah, I don't think it's particularly interesting for attackers or defenders. I think this is a terrible last. And when it comes to pushing and defending, pushing it can be notoriously difficult because a gun pyro is just so strong. Pyro can just stuff people out of the doors entirely, and a gun pyro as well can just keep that gun up while also kind of denying the Uber somewhat. And also, the disad kite options are kind of awkward because you don't really want to back up all the way into spawn because you could just get locked out. But you don't necessarily want to kite up onto bridge if the other team's taking their Uber right side because then you're very flankable from left. Yeah, it's more intuitive to kite right side when they use bridge or something, but they don't always use bridge, of course. So yeah, overall, I think this is a D tier point. Not very good. We have Metalworks second. So Metalworks second is also not my favorite. Basically what every team does is just pressure alley, which does give you some good options. There's just a very accessible soldier high bomb, but when teams are ready for that, then it's not always that effective. But you, of course, still have options. You can be landing on the demo on point, who's sometimes isolated. You could just be committing on the med, or you could try to be fading back. You could try to go behind lobby, just land lobby and jump behind, bring a guy back or something like that. You could be fading and landing underpass and trying to get out there. You should land underpass rather than house, because house is more often trapped than underpass. And if your whole point is to fade and get out, then of course you'd rather land on the door that is safer. Yeah, you could fade and then enable another bomb. But your options are a little bit limited. And also, in my opinion, defending this point, especially as a demo, it's just very difficult to do much. It's very easy to dodge spam in alley, and difficult to get spam on players' alley. There are some cases where teams might try to walk up to point, so there's some at least interesting dynamics there. But I think where this point really, really sucks is disad. Disad, there's just almost nothing you can do. You can play the high bomb in reverse and just try and get that timing, and that's basically all you have. It's very similar to a Gullywash second in that sense, where that bomb and its timing is basically your entire disad hold, and it either works or it doesn't. And to be fair, it is a strong bomb, so it can work. But as a demo or a combo class or anyone who's not directly sacking, there's almost nothing you can do, no good spam you can get. So yeah, it's tough in that regard. I think I might rank this C or D. This might be a D. I just don't really like this point. I like getting off of this point. Pressuring into it's okay, but yeah, not great. Actually, pressuring into it, since pressuring into it is decent, we'll bump it up to a C. Okay, Metalworks mid. A lot of demos might disagree with me here because this is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult mids to play as demo. It's very, very easy to die very early on, and there is kind of a rollout arms race where the demo that shows up earlier is generally at a huge advantage because they can hit the other demo with an early sticky that can't often get reciprocated. But that being said, and the part they might disagree with me on, is that I quite like this mid. I think this is a really interesting mid. You have a lot of options for how you want to play it. So for starters, you can be getting aggressive under the point as like a flank scout or even a demo in some cases. You obviously want to have high ground on the point, and in some cases a mid is won without even necessarily getting a kill from either team, because one team just gets good spam, forces the other team to back up a bit alley, and then takes high ground as a result, and they just lock them out, which is interesting. But you have to pick the timing from which you take high ground really particularly, because if you take it at the wrong time, you're just going to get bombed and shot by the demo, and you're going to die and lose the mid. There are a lot of options for really aggressive soldier play. There is a fast rollout that you don't see too often, but just immediate high bombs from choke are very potent, and you can even potentially go behind with them. You can play an aggressive mid where you just roll out through choke and just try to immediately take the high ground and immediately bomb, which is interesting. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on in Metalworks mid. It's tricky to figure out, in particular for a demo. But overall, I think it's a well-balanced mid, and I might rank this as an A tier, if not an S tier. We'll probably go back later and bump some stuff up to S as we see fit. Okay, process last. Process last can be almost impossible to do anything into if they have a gun and a sniper. If they don't have a sniper, it's a lot more manageable. You can think 1 and 2 pressure. Obviously, with the 1 and 2 angles, you can effectively spam the guy off of the one door and potentially peek it and take space there, which is nice. You can be pressuring lobby as well. Maybe spam a guy off 5, get a guy through 5, or just spam down the gun from 5, spam down the gun from 2. So there's definitely some options in a process last, but overall, and I think in the case of process in general, it's a largely inoffensive map. There aren't too many like super interesting things happening, but also not like super bad things. It is a generally sniper friendly map, which I'm not a fan of, but process last is just overall kind of mid. I don't think it's atrocious in the same way that Metalworks or Gullywash last is. I think it's much more manageable to pressure into, but especially against the gun sniper, it can be very difficult. But I don't know. It's just process. So I'm just gonna rank this as C tier, I think. Okay, next we have process second, and I am a fan of process second. I love the pressure into process second is some of my favorite in the game as a demo. I love it so much. You can just get so much reliable damage. You can carpet things and potentially just get a pick out of nowhere. You can just get a med drop out of nowhere as a demo on occasion. And also, there's some really interesting dynamics with the fact that choke is generally a kind of easy to take space through. Now, it's difficult to actually contest the point and to walk up to like concrete and whatnot. But taking some space choke and playing in that low ground is very achievable for a team. And you can do so with relative ease. And whether you want to take that space through choke or through sewer is up to you. But you can like bait out a bomb if they're trying to like bomb you for being so forward, and maybe convert that into a pick and keep pressuring or whatnot. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics as far as taking space is concerned. This is a notorious sniper stalemate point, and playing against a sniper playing sewer is truly miserable. But teams have some options to like take Ubers and exchanges into sewer. It can be a little difficult. It's just you're very reliant on your soldiers just bombing and fading that sniper. But overall, I am a fan of Process 2. Again, I love the pressure into it so much. I might even give it an A tier off of that alone. Disad is a little uninteresting. Well, it's just difficult to do much from bats, but the traps are okay, and yeah, it's fine. I think I will give it an A. I do like Process 2, assuming they don't have the sniper. All right, Process Mid. Process Mid is a pretty inoffensive mid. It does play pretty rotationally at a lower level, but as you go higher up, more advanced teams will play it more centrally, trying to adapt to whatever, and they might pick a side depending on the state of things. You have options for soldiers going behind. You have some high bomb options. Height control is really, really crucial and a primary focus of demos and scouts. Yeah, overall, I think it's just a solid mid. It doesn't really do too much. It's not that interesting necessarily, but it's okay. You aren't mad when you're playing a process mid. We'll give it a B tier. Okay, this is Reckoner Last. Reckoner Last is interesting. I think it's a pretty solid last to pressure into, all things considered. The sniper is brutal. I will say that. It's kind of impossible to do anything against the sniper. And if you can see a trend here, a lot of lasts, like Metalworks, Process, now Reckoner, are, on the face of it, fine, but against the defensive sniper, absolutely terrible. So yeah, it can be very impossible to do much against the sniper. But it's so wide open that when you are able to take space, that is a real opportunity. It's, a gun is not able to watch everything and quite easy to spam down. You do see demo sacks into this last sometimes, but it's just so wide open and the main door is so large that it's very easy to just high bomb through it. So you do have very aggressive bombing options. And any gun spots as well, if they get spotted, are oftentimes spammable through main. So you can, in some cases, spam a gun down without even peeking, which helps bypass the potential sniper somewhat. So yeah, I actually am overall a little Reckoner friendly. I think the last is okay, and I think I'm going to give it a B tier. Next, we have Reckoner 2. And this is a point that so many people complain about, and I don't know if I get it. The main complaint is it's difficult to sack into, which I can kind of agree on, in some sense. So how does Reckoner second play? Well, typically the defending team is going to position towards Forklift and have their demo trap out cargo. And they just play to rotate, essentially. So, if you go to rotate Toxic and spam Toxic, then they rotate Toxic. Now, Toxic can be pretty difficult to spam into and pressure because it is such low ground that it almost functions like a shutter in that sense. Very spammable, but you can still peek it and you can still get some value. Cargo is another major pressure door where you're just trying to spam the demo off the angle and potentially get a guy through. You can just be bombing players through onto the demo and try and trade with them, because like that forklift area is actually quite claustrophobic and it's pretty easy to spam players out, or not spam players out, but like catch them with bombs, because again, it's just very claustrophobic and there's a lot to get caught on. So that can be a nice strat, and as well, like, Underpass has some potential. Underpass is very easy to spot, which I will say is maybe a downside. A team should maybe have to commit more resources than just a normal scout on height being able to spot everything. And you might need a dedicated spotter for that. But if you are able to get through Underpass, then you have potential wrapping ideas through lobby, as well as just a bomb from, like a high bomb from the floor of Underpass. So there's definitely some opportunities you have. I think that the fact that the rotation is quite slow for the demo between Toxic and Cargo does balance things out a little bit. Of course, a team itself is going to be a little slow to rotate. But still, I have played Reckoner a fair amount this past season and felt generally okay about pressuring to 2. And yeah, I think overall I do like this point. So I think we're going to give this another B tier. Reckoner Mid. Reckoner Mid is interesting. Another one of those kind of bridge mids where it's very push or pull, but you do see some teams play it rotationally. I'm not a big fan of playing it rotationally. I feel like, just playing that low ground is always going to put you at a disadvantage if the other team just takes bridge and bombs you. But I will say, like, trying to immediately play the other team's side, it's not really so much a rotation, but that is a very aggressive option that can work. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on Reckoner Mid. There's some high bomb opportunities. The spam can be really nice as a demo. I think I might give this an A tier. I'm a fan. Okay, next we have Snakewater Last. Snakewater Last is notoriously difficult to pressure into because of the quote-unquote banny gun, which just watches everything and is almost impossible to spam out. So your sacking options are really limited to what can you do while the gun is still up. So teams will potentially take space through shutter or try and pressure shutter and drop down. And from there, you can theoretically spam the gun. So that's one option. Teams will just double sack top right into the demo holding it. But as long as the demo is playing that correctly and kites into the gun, that's not usually too much of a threat. And those players should get cleaned up after, although the gun won't directly watch them if they're far enough away. So that's something to consider. But you don't really have that many options. Teams will snipe into this last a lot of the time. You see a lot of round resets on this last. But also, the other thing is that pushing out of this last is just so horrible. Because not only is it difficult to get through without having to use, but also it's one of the most refightable points in the game. And this is actually something that was adjusted by Valve in like newer versions of Snakewater. They like tweaked with the spawners, because the spawn times on last for the defenders was actually so notoriously long that I'm pretty sure it got decreased. Very common to see fights lost on second, or teams just wipe on two, and that just is the round. Because pushing out is just so insanely difficult, it's so easy to refight as the other team, and because it's just such an easy point to hold, I think this is a D tier point for me. Next we have Snakewater 2. Snakewater 2, while I did also talk about the refight potential as being really bad for pushing out a last, which I think it is. Part of that is just spawners though. Like, even a team that like wipes trying to push the other team's last can very often refight with their spawners and take like a decent enough fight on two. But anyway, as far as like an even Ubers situation goes, I think it's pretty decent. Teams can pressure saw and potentially get a guy behind through cheese, and that is a nice threat to have. And teams can take space lower. Lower is a very dry, pushable area of the map. You don't often walk up to the point, but depending on how much the pressure goes, you might see exchanges baited or attempted. And yeah, with that ease of getting through the initial door and taking the fight from there, leading to very dynamic situations, potentially involving Uber exchanges and micro positioning and whatnot, leads to some interesting gameplay and definitely rewards very good teams, I think. So overall, in evens, I'm a fan of Snakewater 2. Disad, it's okay. You don't really have great spam options. And actually, one of the reasons why I recently have liked using stock grenades on Snakewater is because it's one of the only options that I find gets reliable spam when a team is trying to dry push lower with ad. Lock, of course, reaches, but it's so far away, it seems very reactable. And those stock rollers actually do rack up some chip, and sometimes just like are unpredictable and chase people, so they can't realistically dodge it, which is nice. But yeah, you have some bombing options, flank shove options as well, as strong on Snakewater as always. But yeah, overall, I think I like Snake 2. I think it's a good point. Is it a B or an A for me? I'm thinking maybe... It might be an A. I'm a fan. Pressuring into it's fun. Holding it is fun. The disad is like at least somewhat engaging for both teams. Yeah, it's an A. Snakewater mid. Snakewater mid is interesting. Very, very centralized around bombing, because you are either bombing and trying to walk forward with your bombs, or you are trying to kill the other team's bombs. So a lot of the strategy around Snakewater mid is very pacing dependent. Now, that being said, you can do specific plans such as getting players behind kitchen, from which they can recommit, either going behind lower and bombing from there, or going all the way to saw, or just rebombing from kitchen right back into mid, are all options. It has 3 separate lanes, meaning that as a demo, you can potentially find a timing to shove a lane real quick and maybe get some damage or a kill or something before backing up. Yeah, very push and pull-esque. You obviously don't rotate because it is just, the point in its lanes. Very bombing and committing oriented, and very high ground oriented. Overall, I do like Snakewater mid. I think it's generally pretty fun. I think it might be an A tier. It's weird. What I'm noticing is some maps that I like Gullywash, but it has a D tier and is it 2D? No, it's I don't know. What I'm noticing is some maps that I do enjoy. Oh, Metalworks as well. I like Metalworks, but I have like a D and a C, and then the mid is an A. Whereas Snakewater, I'm not a big fan of Snakewater. I think it's kind of boring, but the points themselves are generally high ranked. I mean, there is of course stuff being lost in translation about how the points interact with each other and how transitions work and whatnot, but still. Okay, next we have Sultry Last. Sultry Last is tough. This is also a extremely complained about point, because pressuring into it is very difficult. A nice central gun is going to watch everything and deny pretty much every bomb. Very difficult to spam out as well. And trying to pressure, for example, top right from the attacker's perspective is basically impossible against like a soldier holding that door. And even more impossible if there's a sniper as well. And that, don't even mention left side, which sure you can spam the soldier off of height and potentially take some space left, but the demo's going to rotate and quickly shut you out, as well as the fact that, again, a sniper can be there. So the hold, especially against the sniper, which, wow, imagine this, that for all these holds, a sniper just makes it impossible to pressure into. Who knew? But yeah, in all these cases, it just is very, very difficult to pressure into. It's a extremely tight last and even Ubers, which can be difficult. And one of the reasons why like a sap and sack started becoming such a popular strategy on this map. So yeah, as a result, I definitely have to rank it kind of low, I think. As far as Ubering into it and pushing it, I think pushing into it is pretty fun. And defending it is pretty solid as well. It's at least interesting in that regard. But pressuring into it is just very difficult. Is it process-esque or is it more Snakewater-esque? I think it is more like Snake and Metalworks-esque difficulty pressuring into, so I'm going to leave it with them there in the D tier, unfortunately. I do like Sultry, though. Okay, Sultry 2. I like Sultry 2. So defending it is interesting. Obviously, you need a spot frog because it's very easy to get distracted with like a pressure cheese or even pressure choke in some cases, which allows a player to slip through frog and then just immediately be on the point, forcing your medic. The choke is interesting. I mean, it's just like process-esque choke where it has that kind of bump in it. Pretty holdable, but still pressurable. And then cheese, of course, has the threat of sending a guy behind through lobby. Overall, I just think it's a generally balanced point as far as pressures are concerned. The bombs are fine. And in some cases, bombs are very successful if the med doesn't kite successfully. Except they kite back towards like forward spawns. They're just stuck in a locker and very easy to force. And also pressuring into the point seems pretty solid, especially from a demo perspective. Just spamming choke. It's very reliable to get damage on point. So I think it's overall a quite balanced point. One that teams do sometimes snipe into, but I think sniper's quite bad into this point, which I'm a big fan of. Even though there's like an insane sightline like all the way back on mid, it just doesn't really see that much if a scout isn't standing on height in the sightline. So yeah, overall, I think this is a very solid second point. As far as disad is concerned, disad's a little weird because you want to be playing back by alley so you're not caught to an Uber versus something like Bats where they could chase through lobby. But it doesn't feel like you can do too much. It feels generally pretty easy to dry push. But yeah, I'm actually quite a fan of Sultry second. I think this might be an A tier point. Looking at the B tiers, yeah, I think this is fine with an A. Okay, we have Sultry mid. Sultry mid, I am a bit of a fan of the mid fight. You have a lot of options as far as where you kite and where you aggress. It is one of those kind of bridge mids, so it is very tug-of-war style across that point. But a lot of high bomb options, a lot of spamming options as well. Yeah, I like it. I think that holding it is a little awkward in some senses, because you do in some cases have to give up space choke. Because if you try and hold it too closely, you're just going to get wrapped from cheese, which is a consideration. But that leads to an interesting dynamic. If a team can get at least a little bit of low ground positioning through a choke point, through which they can pressure, that's interesting. So yeah, I think Sultry mid might be an A tier for me. Okay, we have Sunshine Last. Sunshine Last is curious. So as far as like an even Uber's stalemate goes, pressuring into top right can be... You don't usually get too much value there because there's either a demo there or like a soldier there, and it can be quite difficult. If the demo isn't there, though, the pressure is not horrible, and you can maybe like peek a soldier, but not like full team pressure kind of deal. Usually your team will be pressuring left side, and you can take space left side, assuming, of course, they don't have that sniper. But when you're able to take that space left, then you can maybe spam down the gun and, you know, do all sorts of things. You can pressure cap. Very dynamic situation. So as long as they don't have that sniper, pressuring into Snake or Sunshine Last is quite fun, in my opinion, and I'm a big fan of it. As far as holding it goes, it's just a last. I mean, you know, demo rotating between doors, soldiers just rotating spam. It's usually pretty decent to outlast stuff. But yeah, with that defensive sniper, it's just a tough nut to crack. I think generally process-esque, but I think it's a step above process. It might actually warrant a B tier out of me. As far as pushing it goes, I do think pushing it's quite fun, and defending it is quite fun as well. Now that I think about it, yeah, I think Sunshine gets a B tier out of me. Sunshine 2. I do generally like Sunshine second. Defending it's interesting. You get to rip sticky sinks when they pressure cafe and just kill egotistical pocket scouts, which is fun. And then rotating spam to Valley. Obviously, teams will like to pressure Valley to try and get a guy behind lobby, which is interesting. Yeah, there's some stuff going on. And you can even take some space choke potentially, because the fence kind of obscures choke, so it can be a little difficult for a demo to properly spam it. Yeah, there's some decent stuff going on. And as far as pushing it goes, it's quite balanced in that regard. You know, it's not as free to push as like a Metalworks second or a Gullywash 2, but it's not so difficult, and it's definitely dryable while also being like decent to pop through into. So yeah, I think Sunshine 2 might get an A tier out of me. If it could potentially go higher. We'll see. Sunshine mid. I really like Sunshine mid. So it can play rotationally. And it tends to play rotationally because teams like to pick a side and then kind of continue along that line. I personally am a fan of getting like the good positioning on high ground, like towards point, and then staying there. So if the other team tries to rotate into the low ground into you, you just turn and meet them. I think when people are on the same page about that, it's very effective. A lot of bombing options, a lot of soldier options for like hide plays, you know, rolling out cafe type of deal. So spotting soldiers, of course, are a very important thing if you're playing on the other team's side with a left side mid. There's a lot of variety in which side you play and whether the other team plays to meet you or rotate as well. And then holding it, even Ubers, it's fine. Like the counter sack hold is totally fine. It feels generally balanced. I think pressuring into second from mid is generally fine. As far as pushing it goes with ad, it's quite balanced. I mean, you see teams go cafe, you see teams go valley, you see teams go choke, and you see teams pop through really all of those as well. It's very balanced in that regard. Sunshine mid might be the first definitive S tier we have. I'm a big fan. Yeah. And also, you know, you have potential flanking opportunities under the point as well in the mid fight. I should mention as well in the case of, like, similar to, you know, your Metalworks or your Badlands and Sultry for that matter. I didn't mention it for that mid. All right, last we have Villa. Villa last is curious. Now Villa I don't have a lot of high level experience on. I was back in like main and IM back when this was in the pool, but Villa last I generally like, I think. So I think the pressure into it is not so bad considering the window shutter it has. Any gun on like point or something like that is going to be quite vulnerable to that shutter. And that leads to an interesting dynamic where, similar to like a Gullywash pressure cook, where a pocket soldier could get a ton of value peeking shutter and it's a demo's job to shut them out, you see a similar kind of dynamic here. I think the top left is pressurable as well for the attacking team. Again, assuming they don't have that sniper. But you can potentially get some value there. I think pressuring into it is okay. And there might be even some like dungeon angles you can peek. I'm not too sure. As far as Ubers into it goes, I like it. The shutter Uber, of course, you can pick either side to end on and just bomb whatever side you want. Dungeon Uber, you're already quite deep when you're using through. And the actual geometry around the point is pretty interesting, where defenders kind of have this back wall to play around with and peek the point with. So just picking a side is a little precarious for the attackers, because, you know, they need to control behind that wall as well. Overall, I think I like Villa last. Now, of course, I just don't have a ton of experience, so I'm just going to leave it in a B tier, even though I'm giving it a lot of praise. But yeah, I think it's solid. Okay, on to the controversial one, which is Villa second. And this is considered... This was like the scathing criticism people had about Villa, and the reason why people didn't like this map for so long was because of second. I don't remember what the exact criticism was, whether it was too easy to hold or too easy to push. I think it was the former. And this version of Villa is, second is different. So it's quite easy to, well, peeking choke is curious. So the actual choke door itself is easy to hold for a demo, but if a demo's holding it close, then they're very vulnerable and pressurable from fountain, similar to kind of like a 1 and 2 situation in Process Last, where if a soldier's holding close 1, then they're vulnerable to spam from 2, but a little more pronounced here. So as a result, you generally want to see a demo a little further back, meaning choke is a little more pressurable, and there's some decent like high ground options towards choke that team can spam into. Now, of course, the other team just backed up to point is on high ground. They have a comfortable position, but it's still like pressurable. And I think even like fountain is very easy to take space from. So there's definitely some solid pressuring opportunities. I think, at least just looking at the map and how I expect it would play. So yeah, I think this is like solid. And not to mention as well, there's like some potential for getting a player behind lobby if the other team's just pushed all the way back up to point, because you just go across that like Ivy beam or whatever. And you're there, so you can get a player behind that way. I definitely think there are plenty of opportunities for the attacking team to pressure into this point. And I think there might even be like high bombs as well, like from choke or fountain. So I think overall, this seems like a pretty decently balanced second point now, with the new additions to choke. But I guess we'd have to see how it plays. I think I'm just going to tentatively put it in the B tier for now. And now Villa mid. Villa mid is very Metalworks-esque. You have the kind of sideways bridge that both teams are on either side of, and teams generally play on the low ground. Now, of course, you would like to look for an opportunity to walk up, similar to Metalworks. And I think it does, at least positionally, play very Metalworks-esque. However, it's very, very bomb dominant. It's a pretty small mid, all things considered. So just fast double bombs are really, really strong. And I think it's fine. I think it plays interestingly enough. The rollout's kind of standard to be books now. Teams would roll out choke before, but that's very, very spammable and can be tough. So books tends to be the favored rollout now. But I generally like Villa mid. I might give it an A tier, actually. A lot of the mids tend to be prioritized pretty high. Okay, now let's see. Any final thoughts here? Anything to move around? Let us see. Any S tiers? Maybe even Process Second could be an S tier. But man, that's... the sniper into it kind of ruins it. Snake 2. You can snipe into Snake 2, but in my opinion, it's not that great. Like, that sniper's quite vulnerable to like a high bomb. And also the sightlines aren't fantastic. Sunshine or Snake mid is good. Sultry 2. Since I can't think of any glaring problems with Sultry 2, like it's just, I think Sultry 2 could be S tier, maybe Sunshine 2 as well. Sunshine 2 is a great point. Yeah. I think we're fine with like 3 S tiers here. Okay, that is the list here. So yeah, I know I'm talking about all these like maps with the callouts and whatnot, and for those of you who haven't played these maps, you might just not know what I'm talking about. But hopefully it's still interesting to just kind of hear me talk in depth about what the different holds look like, how they incorporate each other. And yeah, I mean, all these different points are different and they play differently, but they still use the same fundamentals, which is interesting. But man, turned out to be a long one, so I'm sure many of you are fast asleep by now, which is good. I hope you have sweet dreams and hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you next time.